when people are seeing that they can't insure their homes, or when you're using your iPhone to film a fire in LA or in Europe or wherever, that is no longer just something that's 10 years away. We realize that it is today, and it's hitting value and businesses and consumers. So here we're touching upon a very important topic, not just because it's AI and it affects many things, if not everything, but because it falls on a distinction which the world is not paying enough attention to, which is the distinction between what is complicated versus what is complex. Now, AI is very good with what is complicated. Complicated is linear, it's predictable, you understand the variables, you have a range of right answers. It's what we call known unknowns. And if you establish that you might take a course of action, you know the outcomes of that. How do you fix a plane? How do you send a probe to Mars? And all that is complicated, but science and experts understand it. And AI is great at that because you can have pattern recognition and predictability and data analytics and everything. Now, the challenge is the environments which are complex, which are nonlinear, unpredictable, where you don't know ex ante what the impact of something you do is, what it's emergent, it's a trial and error. You don't have a range of right answers at that point in time. You know, if you're in the Amazon and you build a hotel or move a road or a river, you don't know, there's so many different dynamic drivers in flux, you don't know how they affect. So it came back to the question around how intuition can help build competitive edge. I think intuition is essential when there's deep uncertainty, when there's unpredictability. In other words, those environments which are deeply complex and unpredictable, you need intuition because effectively you can't use just analysis or expertise at that point in time. You have to follow intuition. So you have to have confidence and trust yourself and your judgment. You have to avoid preconceptions, cultivate beginner's mind, choshin. You need to be curious with new experiences for unexpected connections. You need to zoom out and seek perspective on what really matters. And you need to embrace reversible decisions, decisions which are reversible, which don't have as many implications as an irreversible decision, are very conducive to intuition. So intuition is really absolutely essential. It's not to reject analysis, expert advice, or scientific thinking, of course, far from that, but it's to recognize that in deep unpredictability, in complex environments, you will need to embrace intuition, and making that distinction between the different type of environments and when intuition is most valuable and how to engage it is essential. Yeah, I came up with this word Metaruptions because after spending a lot of time advising CEOs, boards, and investors on their most strategic deals and observing the fundamental underlying drivers of change, you realize that things are systemic, things are constantly changing. And I found discomfort in reading the hundreds of reports on trends, mega trends, or meta trends, because somehow they all made three assumptions. They made the assumption that if you think about the future, you can derive it in a reasonably predictable and consistent way from the past. The second assumption that they make is that these different mega trends or meta trends interact in a predictable way with one another. In other words, you can take them separately and they'll continue. And when they interact, they will interact in a way that has some degree of predictability and consistency. And the third thing with the meta trends I felt in these reports and everything is that they don't necessarily take into account second or third order implications. What if? So what? What can happen after the initial impact of change? And so I felt that actually more telling of today's deeply unpredictable environment is Metaruptions. In other words, change is a constant. It constantly evolves, it's dynamic, and creates and cascades into new situations. Not necessarily bad. It could be positive things and virtuous, but it's simply constantly changing. And so I'm trying to sort of dispel this myth of of the rear view mirror, which I think come with meta trends or mega trends as a taxonomy. And what do you do about it? Well, you stop assuming that the world is predictable, that you can have short-term assumptions, milestones, that you can have an answer to everything, that it's controllable and stable and contained, that you can model uncertainties to deliver certainty. You understand that basically you need to think of next order implications. You need to think of how things emerge and evolve. You need to maybe think about the questions being more important than the answers. So you're constantly exploring, and you need to accept the multiplicity of possibilities that might arise, for which you need to build resiliency, future preparedness. And that is basically, you need to engage your agency and indeterminacy. I find foresight and scenarios essential for this multi-polar, multi-plural world, where basically you need to imagine different possible outcomes. You need to think about nonlinearity and asymmetry, about small risks or small opportunities can have disproportionate results and outcomes. And so really what you're doing with Metaruptions is thinking more in terms of possible futures, agency, indeterminacy, and emergence, trial and error. You're amplifying things that work, you're dampening things that may work less well. And those provide plausible scenarios which might arise. And you're not trying to predict the future here. You're really trying to prepare for different possibilities and emerge in the present with a view that different things might arise, as opposed to betting everything on one specific predetermined expected outcome. So climate is a tricky one, right, today, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's existential, and so there's no plan B. If you know, maybe for one or two who believe they can live in Mars, but I think for most of the world, and for me certainly, today there's no plan B to the planet. So the implications and the irreversibility, if we reach certain milestones around climate, are very severe. Now, at the same time, we know that it faces a lot of polarization, skepticism, and that affects regulation and incentives and structures for how companies might make decisions around climate and build resiliency. My view, working significantly and through our DFI Nature and Climate Academy, we spend a lot of time thinking about these topics, working with CEOs, investors, and boards around this, is that we're moving from a tick the box or an ESG or compliance topic to the urgency and the reality of today. When people are seeing that they can't insure their homes, or when you're using your iPhone to film a fire in LA or in Europe or wherever, that is no longer just something that's 10 years away. We realize that it is today, and it's hitting value and businesses and consumers. So my belief is that today, a climate-aligned decision-making is basically decision-making in deep uncertainty. And in complex, nonlinear, asymmetric environments, which is what we live in, you can't just rely on decisions based on the means and the average and what you expect. So I think that to build client resiliency, it's now something which falls in the broader categories of building resiliency for sustainable value creation for a business. I don't believe it's a separate topic necessarily. It affects insurance, supply chains, it affects everything, but also geopolitics or cyber. These are drivers of change and disruption for which organizations need to be mindful in building that resiliency. So there's no specific label or category for climate from the rest. And then how do we do it? I think it comes back to a lot of the work around scenario development, foresight, anticipatory thinking, building anti-fragility and resilience into the systems, from supply chain to physical assets, to transition to financial assets. And it's really a fundamental rethink of the way business operates, business operating as a system in environments which are deeply unpredictable, and where extreme events, from cyber to climate to societal to technological to AI to all kinds of things, both for value destruction and for value creation, are emerging all the time. And so it's a new operating system for making sense of those environments, for making decisions in those environments, whether they are climate resilient or climate decisions, or more generally, just sustainable value creation in the broadest sense of the word. It's really the aha moment. It's the aha moment where we realize that staying relevant and relevancy, whether it's as individuals, an organization, a leadership, a country, a region, an industry, relevancy and staying relevant is not a given. Every day, things are changing. That creates opportunities for emerging players, for new situations. It also means that legacy and the current leaders may not necessarily, no one cares that you were number one for 30 years or 10 years or 100 years or whatever. So I think it's both an opportunity and a risk to appreciate the duality of systemic change, to appreciate what it is to stay relevant. And my biggest wish is really that one realizes that what influences the decisions you make, how you prepare and respond to change, is driven by how you see the world, the way you see the world, the assumptions you make about the world, your world views, and the assumptions you make about your business or your life within the subset of how you see the world. Those will determine how you prepare for both the opportunities and the risks, and then how you respond to things you could not necessarily anticipate and prepare for. So for me, those are really the biggest takeaways. You realize the importance of relevancy. You realize the importance of the way you see the world. You see the world maybe in a broader, more changing, more systemic world where this is confronted with the duality of both opportunities and risks, and that you are an agent, you have agency, and you can drive and shape the futures depending on how you see them.